And then the internet and dreams aren't a tangible, real thing, and yet they can infiltrate the real world and have very real effects. And sometimes they can be very real adverse effects. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about Paprika. The book is by Yasutaka Tsutsi, and it was published in 1993, and I'm comparing it with the 2006 Satoshi Kon movie. So a few months ago, I covered Perfect Blue, which was Satoshi Kon's first film, and I absolutely loved it. It was fantastic, and so that is what led me now to cover Paprika. This was his final film before he died at a young age, relatively young, and this is also his only other movie that is based on a book. But I'm going to begin this video talking about the book, and there'll be light spoilers, but it's, mostly spoiler-free, but I just had so many problems with this book. But before I get into them, I first want to say that if you liked this book, please comment down below and share your thoughts. I genuinely want to hear from people who liked this, just because I had a lot of problems. I still love hearing from people who had a different experience with a book or movie than I did, so let's talk about it down in the comments. And despite my problems, this book is very creative and imaginative, and the idea of accessing people's dreams, not only being able to watch them, but being able to enter them, and just how the dream world impacts the real world. And it's so cool, and it's such a cool idea. And so there are things about this book that I do like a lot. And Satoshi Kon, he had been wanting to adapt this for a long time. So this was kind of a passion project for him. And not only was Kon taken with this book and its ideas, but Christopher Nolan obviously was as well. Though assumably Nolan was inspired by the film Paprika, not the book. But obviously he used some of these ideas in his movie Inception. But to move on to the book, it has a lot of sexism, which I will get into and share examples of. But before I do that, I want to clarify myself on something that I feel like maybe I didn't articulate well in past videos, specifically my video for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I have a big problem with that book because I feel like the book itself, the message that book is presenting, feels like a sexist one. I read it like 3 years ago now, so as far as what my memory of it is and how I felt at the time I read it, it felt very sexist. And yet I've gotten comments from people who seem to misunderstand what I'm saying, and they seem to think I disliked the book because it had a sexist character, but that's not why I disliked it. I disliked it because it felt like the message the book is telling is a sexist one. And so I just want to now, before I get into Paprika, I want to explain my views on this because I have read a lot of books that have sexist and even misogynistic characters, and yet I love these books. And that also goes for books that have racist characters or homophobic characters. And I don't enjoy reading content like that, like hearing these things that people have to say that are so horrible. And yet I understand that there is a place in books and movies for terrible people like this who have these horrible views of women, of gay people, of Black people, or, whatever. I get storytelling. There is a place for people such as this. And just because a book or a movie has a character like this, it does not therefore mean that the author or the director is therefore sexist. And just because a book has a sexist character does not mean that the book as a whole is a sexist one. Rather, I feel like the book as a whole is sexist when the message it's conveying is a sexist one. And also sometimes the way the women characters react to the sexism, that can also be the brunt of the issue at times, as we will get into with Paprika. But for example, we have the Stepford Wives. That has a lot of sexist characters and a lot of sexist themes, and yet the book itself is not sexist. And then you have the book of Mice and Men, which I love, and that has a lot of sexism and racism, and yet the book itself is not sexist or racist. The sexism and racism within that serve a purpose, as well as just being a reflection of the time, right? Because that book was written in the 1930s, and that's what the 1930s life was like. And so in cases like that, it's more of a time capsule, right? And so it serves a purpose for the sake of the story, while also being a reflection of the time. And I talked about this in my video for Sex and the City, because people will talk about that show and how it hasn't aged well. And yet, I may have used that term in years past, but over time I have evolved in my thinking to now, I don't like that term, because I feel like when something, again, is a reflection of society at that time, like, it's not a case of it didn't age well, it's a case of this is a time capsule and this is what the world was like. And it's good that it wasn't concerned with aging well, because it wouldn't have been authentic. And so same with Of Mice and Men, like, that was a reflection of the time. If he was concerned with it aging well, it would have come across as false. And yet with the book Paprika, this one, it doesn't come across like, oh, it's just a time capsule of 1993 Japan. It doesn't seem like it reflects society. Rather, it seems like it's just what this one guy thought. And I feel like it was in bad taste then, and it's in bad taste now. And I will say there is some homophobia in the book, and I'll say that part could be more of a reflection of society at the time, to be fair, but to address the sexism. And I will be sharing a lot of quotes from the book to illustrate my point, to show that I'm not exaggerating with what I'm saying about it. So the most horrendous scene, arguably, is when a guy attempts to rape our main character, Atsuku, also known as Paprika. Although at the time this happens, Paprika is her alter ego, but at the time this happens, she is Atsuku Chiba. And so this guy is in her apartment, and he forces her down and he hits her repeatedly, and he hits her at one point so hard that she even blacks out before coming to again. And we read, "I didn't want to do this," he bellowed, then stood and punched Atsuku hard on the jaw with his clenched fist. A mist descended before her eyes as she passed out. Atsuku continued her mute resistance for 3 or 4 minutes. In the meantime, Osanai had ripped the front of her dress and punched her around the mouth, which was now spattered with blood. And so from here, she's wanting to prevent being hurt more. And so she decides to just let him do it. And that part makes sense, because there's fight, flight, or freeze. And when fight doesn't work, it makes sense for your instinct to then go to just freeze, because you're like, if I just freeze and let it happen, I'll be hurt less. And so that makes sense. But where he continues to go from here is where it just gets really weird. So she decides that she should just let it happen. But she also goes on to be like, oh, well, plus he's so attractive and he's doing this out of love. And it's been a long time since I've gotten laid, so this kind of works out anyway. And we read, "She just didn't want to be hurt anymore, so she decided to let him rape her. She would think of him not as a vile beast, but as a man with the mind of a child. That would make it bearable. After all, she didn't necessarily dislike childish men. He probably didn't have any diseases. His breath wasn't disgusting. He wasn't dirty. Yes, he was an enemy, and if she were a man, she would have fought him until her dying breath. But she was a woman. She had no intention of aping a man's senseless insistence on fighting to the death. All right. She slapped Osanai's back as he lay sprawled on top of her. I'll let you do it. You don't have to be so rough. I'll let you do it. Though not of her own choosing, this would be the perfect chance to satisfy that desire. Atsuku stood up, stepped out of her ripped dress, and stripped off her underwear. She was starting to feel as if it were she who'd taken the initiative, lured this man to her apartment, and seduced him. Of course, it did help that Osanai was so absurdly handsome, a fine gigolo indeed, and he had professed his love for her, notwithstanding the means he'd chosen to express it. In fact, Osanai seemed quite happy to let Atsuku take command. In full compliance with Atsuku's demands, Osanai did his best to create an atmosphere of a wholly pleasurable sexual experience for her. But then from here, he is unable to get it up, and so then she ridicules him about it before he then leaves. And we read, Atsuku's libido had now been awoken. If Osanai couldn't do anything to satisfy her, it would be a disaster. What is this? She screamed. Do it if you're going to do it. You could have at least prepared yourself. I'm sorry, Osanai said feebly. Your aura's too strong. And then once he leaves, she then feels bad, and she regrets the way she ridiculed him about not being able to get it up. And we read, now she could think coolly, calmly. As a psychotherapist, certainly she had failed. She should have shown more sympathy with Osanai for his impotence. Not that it had anything to do with philanthropy. It was a question of interests. She could have made him her ally in the process. Even so, she refused to blame herself for giving way to her emotions and insulting him. So to be fair, she's thinking this in a more calculated way, being like, if I wasn't so mean to him, I could have gotten him on my side and, gotten information from him or something. So I guess that makes it not quite as bad, and yet it still just seems like a weird thought process for a character to be having after experiencing something so violent and horrible. But then it gets even worse, because after this, she's then like, shoot, I was ready to have sex. And now, like, I'm disappointed that he didn't follow through with it, because now I have an itch that I myself can't satisfy. So she decides to call up a male coworker of hers so that they can have sex and satisfy her craving, which has been awoken. Atsuku was troubled by the thought that she couldn't satisfy her passion now that it was ignited. She could, of course, regulate her bodily functions with her mind, but all she wanted now was an outlet for her lust, as if a valve had been unlocked inside of her. And this passion inside of her could never be satisfied by the self-pleasuring of any woman, let alone an intelligent woman who was always denying or suppressing the calls of physical pleasure. So, rather than be traumatized by this incredibly violent thing that just took place, she's disappointed that her rapist didn't follow through and is going to make a booty call in order to satisfy herself. Like, just, I don't even know what to say. This whole scene was just so bizarre. Like, the fact that it's a violent attempted rape scene is upsetting enough, but then the way she responds to it and the way the author writes about it, again, it just is like, it's just so bizarre. And I'm laughing because sometimes things that make me uncomfortable make me laugh, so I don't find it funny. It just makes me uncomfortable, and I'm just like, who would think to write something like this? And I hated this scene for so many different reasons, but primarily because of the way he wrote how this woman is responding to having such a violent thing take place. I just don't even know what to say about it. But then there is the fact that Paprika is a therapist who enters people's dreams, primarily men. Her clients are often men. She will enter their dreams in order to diagnose what is causing their mental health issues. And turns out a key part of the therapy process is having sex with these men. She always felt irresistibly attracted to men of high social standing. Of course, some of them were clinically depressed and thoroughly repugnant. She certainly didn't feel like giving her body to all of them, even in their dreams, and yet the patients who missed out on this treatment were always the slowest to be cured. And then she also has such negative views of other women, especially these men's wives, because, by the way, these men she's having sex with for therapy are married and have children. But one man in particular, she kind of justifies it by making the assumption, she doesn't know for sure, she just assumes, like, oh, this guy's wife must ridicule him and she's probably cheating on him, and that's why he has such low confidence, so I need to have sex with him for therapy reasons in order to boost his self-esteem. And we never find out if these assumptions were even true. Like, I guess we're left to believe Paprika must be right because her intuition or something. But yeah, she's just making these negative assumptions about the wives and being like, they're so ungrateful. Her husband is such a great guy, and yet she mistreats him, and that's unfair. And I'm just going to read a few sections from this part. Paprika bridled with the righteous indignation that single women often feel against the wives of likable married men. And then when they are having the dream sex, we read, yes, there was an awkwardness about him, and that would no doubt irritate a woman who felt no love for him. She would ridicule him for his clumsiness. His wife probably voiced her dissatisfaction with him even during intercourse, and this must have fueled his loss of confidence. But Paprika found his clumsiness charming. She even saw it as part of his attraction, even wondered if it wasn't the true attraction of a man. And as well as Paprika disliking the wives of these men, we also get this line. Noda had problems of his own. To take advantage of his feelings towards her and beg for his help without a thought for those problems would make her no better than those self-centered young women she observed all around her. And so it's like, oh, Paprika, she's not like other girls, or Atsuku, she's not like other girls. Not only is she so unbelievably gorgeous, she also understands men so much more and sees how, their clumsiness is part of the appeal. And, oh, other women, they have no thought to the troubles men have going on in their lives, and they're so self-centered. But not Atsuku, not Paprika. She's better than all of them. So the book also just comes across as very demeaning towards women in a variety of ways. But yeah, and the fact that, like, such a key part of her therapy is having sex with these men. Like, it's not because of her brains and logic necessarily. It comes down to the fact that she's so beautiful and every man falls in love with her. And then the fact that she's willing to have sex with them is really the key to why she has such a high success rate. And despite being a Nobel-winning psychiatrist, we just don't learn that much about her, aside from the fact that she's beautiful. And so she really is written as just the manic pixie dream girl. And the dream girl aspect is quite literal because she is in their dreams. And maybe, like, is that the point the author is making? Is that she is literally a dream girl and not a real example of a real woman? But the book really doesn't come across like he's trying to make that kind of point. But also at one point, Paprika gets trapped in a dream and she is unable to awake in the real world. And so she is stuck in this dream. And so she gets these two men to enter the dream in order to try to rescue her. And what does she suggest as a way to get them to help her wake up? She tells them to rape her. But also, if she's telling them to do it, it wouldn't be rape at that point, and yet that's the word she uses. And so he does do this, and then she does wake up. Tetsuo, please rape me, over there, on the sofa, with all the guests and porters looking on. Noda laughed at Konakawa's caution. Of course it's absurd. It's a dream. Lighten up. Noda now saw the truth. Paprika and Konakawa made love in a dream during his treatment. Well then, you've already had your turn. You hid it from me. Look, you're both going red. It wasn't like that. It was for treatment. That's right, it was for treatment. But Noda wasn't fooled. Paprika and Konakawa made love in his dream because they loved each other. Even so, Noda doubted whether he could really do it right now. See? Even thinking about sex with Paprika is threatening to wake me up. Don't wake up, Paprika cried. You mustn't, please. Rape me here and now. Or if you feel bad about raping me, it doesn't have to be like that. Please make love to me. And also the way these men talk about Paprika, like in that scene right there, they're so, like I'm trying to think of what the word is, but it's like they express ownership over her and being like, oh, I see, you've already had your turn with her, and so now it's my turn, as if she's an object, right? And these men are written in a way like we're supposed to like them. And yet that's how they're treating her. And she likes them too, right? Because she falls in love with all these guys. But later on in the story, after their dreams are being infiltrated by nightmares, 5 men protect Paprika by sleeping with her. And I don't know if they're having sex, but even if they're not, this is a very sensual thing that's taking place between Atsuku/Paprika and these 5 men. And so basically, these men are each taking turns being with her. And it's just so weird and so gross. And also, some of these men are married. But we read, instead, the dreams of Tokita, Noda, Konakawa, Shima, and even Osanai had started to merge with Atsuku's dreams. Being the dreams of men who loved her, they smothered her softly as if to protect her from Inui's dreams. Inui being the bad guy. Sometimes she would yield her body to the pleasure of sleeping between Tokita and Osanai. At other times, the pair caressing her on the bed would be Noda and Konakawa. Since the men were in the majority, their dreams overwhelmed Atsuku's. She had no idea where her own dreams had gone, but she was by no means unhappy to consort with them in their dreams. The divine sensations of pleasure she had found there, almost as if her body could melt, were not to be found in the real world. In many ways, they felt even more vivid than reality. Sometimes neither Atsuku nor the men could tell whether they were dreaming or not, for when they woke up, Atsuku would often find herself embracing one of them on her bed or cavorting with the other two at the same time. And so yeah, every man falls in love with her because she's so beautiful and not like other girls. But also, she in turn so quickly falls in love with like every man she comes across. And at one point they're being interviewed and a reporter is being sexist, implying that because Atsuku is so beautiful, she must have an intimate relationship going on with her male coworker. And yet the author proves that this is kind of how he feels about it too, because Atsuku truly does fall in love with every man, and she's also having sex with them. And in that section I read, Paprika/Atsuku, she doesn't have her own dreams anymore because her dreams are being smothered by the 5 men she is with. And so she is literally losing her identity in favor of taking on these men's dreams instead of her own. And she's fine with it, right? And then with her having sex with a variety of men, the issue I have with this is that, again, she's doing it for the men. And like, yeah, sure, sometimes she enjoys it. But in that section I read, it said how like, oh, she didn't always want to do it. And some of these guys were gross. But when she did do it, it sped up recovery. So more often than not, she'll have sex with them, not for her own pleasure, but for their sake. And so, yeah, she's giving her body purely for the benefit of men, more often than not. And then in the end, she's also just losing her identity. And Atsuku is seen as the ideal woman in looks and attitude, so it just seems like weird messaging on the part of this male author. And then to talk about that rape scene at the start too, it's just so gross and feels like something a man would write. Like, I'm imagining if some guy saw a woman talking about being raped, but if the rapist was attractive, the man might think like, what is she making a big deal about? Like, at least the guy is handsome, as if that has anything to do with it, as if that would make it better. Like, this guy also, he beat her up in the process, yet later on he is allowed to be part of their sex dream group in the end. And I'm all for forgiveness, but you should still have boundaries. So allowing a violent rapist to be part of her sex group makes no sense in my mind. And then there is the gay couple who are the villains of the story. Particularly one of them is the main bad guy. But not only are they gay, they're part of this weird, evil, gay Christian cult that have sexual feelings towards Jesus. To them, even Jesus Christ was a comrade in arms who had fought against the establishment. He even was occasionally feted as an object of homosexual love. And then when Paprika is in a dream that belongs to Inui, the main bad guy, we read, "Why did Paprika find this image of the dying Christ so alluring? Paprika gasped. It was not Jesus Christ, but Morio Osanai. That was why the sight of his freshly flowing blood, his face beautifully distorted and suffering, seemed so erotic to her." So in Inui's dream, he has replaced Jesus's face with that of his lover, Osanai. So yeah, just very weird. And this book also makes them out to be like these deviant, sex-obsessed gay men. Osanai, I guess he's bisexual because he's also the one who tries to get with Atsuku. And then at one point he does join the good side and is being sexual with Atsuku. And so he's bisexual, I guess. But yeah, it's still showing like this gay couple. Not only are they villains, they're also seen as being, again, just so sex-obsessed and evil and depraved in a sense. But then some minor issues I had with the book is the fact that we are introduced to so many characters. Within the first chapter even, like so many people are introduced to us and they all have Japanese names, which I myself am not familiar with. So when I first started this book, I was so confused and not following. And so I put it down. And when I returned to it the next day, I started from the beginning. And every time a character was introduced, I wrote down their name, wrote down their gender, and a few things about them so that I could know who they were. And I would use this piece of paper while I was reading until I got their names under control. But yeah, it was very confusing. And also, so many of the characters have very similar names. So it would be like if a English author had 3 characters named Matt, Mark, and Mary, right? Like a non-English speaker would probably get those 3 confused. And so that's how it was with this book. And so, yeah, thankfully I'd been writing the names down. Otherwise, I would have just been so lost. And then I also felt like this book just went on longer than necessary. And we have the dream sections at the start when she is diagnosing these 2 clients and their dreams, and especially Noda, like getting into his psychological issues and his dreams. And then we hear about his work life. I did not care, and it doesn't even come up later. And so I felt like those parts were unnecessary and not very interesting. And then also as far as what's going on with the DC minis, that also is just kind of repetitive. It's so dragged out. And then suddenly it's like, oh, and now it's over. And so just weird pacing, ultimately, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so, yeah, suffice it to say, I was not a huge fan of this book for a variety of reasons. I personally wouldn't recommend it, but of course, you're your own person. Go ahead and give this book a shot and let me know if you agree or disagree. But to now move on to the movie. So the movie does not have any of the issues that the book has. They get right to the point and don't dilly-dally with the unnecessary side plots. The characters are easier to keep in line because there are fewer of them, but also seeing the faces to go with the names, of course, helps. And the sexism isn't here at all, except within the characters themselves, which is not something I have a problem with, like I said earlier. And as far as this and Perfect Blue, I do prefer Perfect Blue, the movie, over Paprika. But Paprika is still a movie I would highly recommend. And again, Kon, he had been wanting to adapt this for a long time. So this is more of a passion project for him. Where with Perfect Blue, he was just handed the script, which he didn't like, and then he did a lot of reworking. But it wasn't his choice to tell that story necessarily, whereas Paprika, it was. But there are a lot of similar themes going on, like with identity and like what's real, what's not, as well as movies, kind of. Like movies play a part in both, and yet they're explored in very different ways. But the way movies are explored in Paprika kind of feel more personal to Kon as a filmmaker, I would say. And so, for the personal reasons on Kon's part, as well as this movie just being such a unique, wild, fun, disturbing experience, it makes this movie worth checking out. And also both this and Perfect Blue, they're fairly short, and yet he is able to fit so much into the allotted time. And the animation in Paprika, I would say, is also a big improvement from Perfect Blue. And then the soundtrack in Paprika is also incredible. I loved it. So yeah, I would highly recommend this movie, and now from here on out, I will get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So while this movie follows the plot of the book closer than Perfect Blue did, which was totally different, I am still going to talk about them separately because they are still different enough, and so I feel like it's just less complicated to just talk about them separate. So, Dr. Atsuku Chiba and Tokita have created a therapy device that can access their patients' dreams, and by watching their dreams, they can help get to the root of their mental health issues. And these devices also allow therapists to enter the dream if they so desire. And these devices are illegal initially, so under the guise of Paprika, Atsuku will work with clients on the down low. But when the story starts, some time has passed, and so the devices are now not only legal, but she and Tokita are also up for the Nobel Prize for their work in therapy. But two men, one named Inui, the other Osanai. Inui is an older man, Osanai is younger. The two of them are very envious of Atsuku and Tokita. They're jealous of their fame and notoriety. And when Tokita then creates what he calls the DC Mini, which is the PT device but much smaller, Inui and Osanai steal them. And they feel like these devices should not be used just for therapy, and rather they should be available to the world, basically the general public, which was very different from the movie. In the movie, Inui's motivations are like the total opposite, but in the book we read, needless to say, the present enemies in this holy war were Katsuku Tokita and Atsuku Chiba, who sought to use PT devices they had developed solely for the purpose of inhuman therapy. It was not that Inui denied the validity of PT devices, and particularly their pièce de résistance, the DC Mini. He merely felt that they should be put to better use in improving the human mind. In fact, he and Osanai had used DC Minis stolen from Tokita to steep themselves in occultic raptures based on their love for each other. There could be no more effective tool than the DC Mini for teaching the quintessence of the doctrine via mystic meditation, thus leading the user to ecstasy, as Inui had done with Osanai. For the sake of the sect, the DC Mini should be available for broader use among the public, the irredeemable contemporary man. For the time being, in particular, he urgently needed to open the eyes of the doctors and scientists around him, for they had sold themselves completely to the establishment and were now serving the false god of technology. And so when they stole these devices, Atsuku, she had placed one of them in her pocket. And in the book, they're like these very small round things. And so she had placed one in her pocket, so that one she has, but the rest are stolen by Inui and Osanai. And they were so new that Tokita and Chiba had not yet used them. And Tokita also, he puts a protective measure on the devices that prevent people with ill intentions from using them. But the DC Minis are so brand new that he had not put that on them yet. And so that is how Inui and Osanai are able to use them for bad purposes. And so Inui and Osanai have been using the PT devices and the DC Minis to cause people at the Institute to go insane by feeding them the dreams of a schizophrenic into their subconscious. And again, meanwhile, they are also using them in their apartment in the evening to experience, sexual pleasures beyond their wildest dreams. But Atsuku Chiba, she is in her apartment in the same building, working with clients using a PT device. And because the DC Minis are so powerful, Osanai and Inui start unintentionally infiltrating the dreams of Chiba's clients as she is working with them. And so, long story short, when, the good guys, which is Paprika and these other men on her team, they realize who have stolen the DC minis. And so they start battling each other in the dream world, trying to retrieve the DC minis. However, Inui and Osanai, eventually, they start using the DC minis so much that they don't even need to be wearing them to enter the dream world, which make them a very formidable foe. But also, if you've been wearing the DC mini long enough, it also just gets embedded in your head, which is pretty gross. And so that ends up happening to Inui. But at one point, Osanai, his dream self, because dreams start merging with the real world, and Osanai's dream self enters the real world where he is then shot, and his real world self is not killed by this, but he does start to weaken and almost not waste away, but he does start to weaken. And then Paprika actually comes to his rescue, and he ultimately then ends up helping the good guys out. And he is part of that group of 5 men who protect Paprika by sleeping with her. But yeah, eventually the nightmare world that Inui has created starts merging with the real world, and people in Japan are being killed, and it's wreaking havoc when the Nobel Prize ceremony is coming up, and Tokita and Chiba had won this. And so they end up going to the ceremony, and Inui, again, he was incredibly jealous of their notoriety and getting this award. And so he saves up a lot of his energy to make a huge scene at this award ceremony and to ruin it by infiltrating it with dreams. However, after this, it used up so much of his strength, and he was already so weakened that after this, he eventually ends up dying, and they find his body sometime later. And in the end, everything is fine. Atsuku and Tokita end up getting married, and the people of Japan now only have a hazy memory of the insane time when dreams were taking over their country. Whereas in the movie, the DC minis, they are part of the story right away. And so Paprika has been using the DC mini to work with her current client, a guy named Kogawa. And then also very soon we find out that the DC minis have been stolen. Whereas again, the book, it kind of takes a long time to get this happening, and we're, dealing with all of this other stuff that's not nearly as interesting. Whereas the movie just cuts right to the chase. And also their boss starts acting strange very early on, and he almost dies. And when they then are able to look into his dreams, they see that someone has placed visions in his mind of this parade that is now taking over his mind and making him crazy. And in the dream, they see the face of Tokita's assistant. And so then when they go to this assistant's apartment, Atsuku nearly falls to her death while being in the dream world, because due to using the DC mini, she is now susceptible to being placed in a dream unintentionally. And later, when working again with Kogawa in his dream world, his dream gets infiltrated by the nightmare parade that has been used to make people go crazy. So this nightmare is now blending with other people's dreams. And so she later goes into the parade dream to investigate when she comes in contact with Inui, and this is when she realizes that he is the mastermind behind everything. And while she's trying to get away from him, she thinks she has awoken and she goes about doing her stuff, only to eventually realize that she never did wake up and she is still in a dream, and Inui shows up once again and he is attacking her. And she ends up being caught and strapped to a table with Osanai, who is helping Inui. And so in the movie, Osanai is telling Paprika that he loves her, but he loves the true her, who is Atsuku, because Paprika is Atsuku's alter ego. And so he puts his hand through her private area and moves it up through her body to remove the outer layer of Paprika to reveal Chiba underneath, who is unconscious. And I wanted to mention real quick how this scene is similar to Under the Skin, the movie, not the book. I have a book versus movie for that, but in the movie there is a scene where a man tries to rape the main character, and in his attempt, he removes her outer skin, and just the significance of that and the symbolism of it. So yeah, I do have a video for Under the Skin if you want to hear my thoughts on that book and movie. Meanwhile, Kogawa is at this internet bar where he and Paprika had met before, and so this internet bar is kind of connected to the dream world. And so while he is processing his own past and piecing things together and why he's having anxiety, he then hears Paprika's screams in this other dream world. And so he is able to break into the dream world with Paprika. So Osanai, he had removed, the outer layer of Paprika, but then Inui takes over Osanai, and Inui wants to kill Atsuku. And so Osanai is trying to fight Inui when then Kogawa comes in and he saves Atsuku. But Paprika Atsuku, she has been knocked out for all of this, so he's just holding her, and she is unable to wake up still in the real world and is just knocked out in the dream world. And Kogawa, loving movies, has a movie moment where he shoots Osanai and then he stands heroically with his gun and Paprika, and he then kisses her triumphantly, or I should say she looks like Atsuku, not Paprika. So he kisses Atsuku triumphantly, and this wakes her up in the dream, and she slaps him for kissing her, and this whole event then wakes her up in the real life as well. But then Osanai, he had been shot in the dream world, and then this causes him to die in the real world. However, Inui, before Osanai dies, or before he gets sucked into this hole, Inui is able to absorb his body, which gives him Osanai's strength. And then as the dream world starts to merge with the real world, Inui emerges as a giant dark figure who's going to take over the world. But Paprika realizes that what is opposite to Inui will defeat him. And so then, again, at this point, the real world and the dream world have blended into one. And so Atsuku and Paprika are two distinct beings because you have her real world self and her dream self. And so Atsuku is inside of robot Tokida's body. And so Paprika goes inside of Tokida's robot body, and I guess she blends with Atsuku, and then she emerges as a toddler girl, and then she sucks up this nightmare dream world and even sucks up Inui. And as the more dreams she eats, the bigger she grows. And eventually, again, she just keeps growing more and more. And eventually she even eats up Inui himself and absorbs him. And then she herself stands there heroically before then disappearing, leaving the world peaceful. And in the movie, like I said, Inui's motivations were very different because in the movie, he feels like dreams are a sacred place and they should not be infiltrating dreams with these devices. And so that is why he is against them. But obviously, over the course of the story, he just becomes a power-hungry villain, as is usually the case. But I did like the end here with Paprika. She is the opposite of what Inui is, and that is what gives her strength, including the fact that he is a man and she is a woman. And in the book, being a woman is what made her successful, but it was done in such a dumb way, where it was simply being hot and having sex with men that did it. Whereas here, it is something deeper and more complex and more meaningful, and something that does not feel sexist that gives her her power. And honestly, that moment when she's just this giant woman standing there having defeated Inui, it's kind of an awesome moment. And then she disappears and then reappears later as Atsuku. And I like how the movie explores how the dream version of ourselves sometimes is the truer version, because in the real world, we sometimes put up a facade, whereas when we're dreaming, we don't feel the need to do that. And also, in the waking world, we will suppress certain memories and feelings, and yet those memories can surface in the dream world, again, because the dream world is sometimes the more authentic version of us, and these things we're trying to suppress show up front and center. And we see this with Atsuku, how as Atsuku, she is very serious and insults Tokita. And yet when she is faced with Paprika, who is questioning her, because again, when the dream world merges with reality, Paprika becomes a separate entity. And while they are talking, Atsuku comes to the realization that she loves Tokita and not only embraces him, but metaphorically embraces herself and her feelings. And earlier Atsuku, she seemed to have lost her own identity, and she talks about how she doesn't have her own dreams anymore. But by the end, again, because she kind of fully merged herself with Paprika, because Paprika was such a distinct other personality. And so because she kind of embraces her full self and all of her feelings, she now is in touch with who she is. Like she has found herself again. And then this is obviously very present with Kogawa, the man she is treating at the start, who is having anxiety, and his dreams always have a very cinematic movie feel, and yet he claims he doesn't like movies and he wants to avoid talking about movies. But he later confronts the truth about how he feels he betrayed himself by abandoning his dream of being a filmmaker and suppressing the memory of his filmmaking friend who died. And so he also has this realization that he became a detective because he wanted to turn his fiction into a reality, because he and this friend had made a movie about a cop. And so him confronting why he feels such anxiety and why he doesn't want to talk about movies and why he doesn't want to talk about the past is because, again, he feels like he abandoned his younger self and he didn't stay true to what he and this friend dreamed of doing. And yet when he confronts that, he is at peace with himself. And we see him in the end going to the movies, and we see the different posters. They're all past films of Satoshi Kon's. And apparently the dream he is going to see, the movie he is going to see, it's called like Dreaming Kids or something. And I read that that was the name of Satoshi Kon's upcoming film that he was working on, but then he died and he never completed it. And so the fact that Kogawa is going to see this movie of Satoshi Kon's that never got released because he died, like that, the ending scene just feels all the more powerful when you know that. But also in the very end, Inui is dark and Paprika is light. And this made me think of the idea of the shadow self, which is a Carl Jung philosophy. And the shadow self is a representation of the personal unconscious as a whole and usually embodies the compensating values to those held by the conscious personality. It is the hidden, suppressed side of the persona. The shadow's characteristics are in direct opposition to the persona. Thus, the shadow can often represent one's dark side and those aspects of oneself that exist, but which one does not acknowledge or which one does not identify. This is also described as the animalistic and sinister aspect of all people. Even though the shadow may seem to be a negative archetype, one that would degrade and destroy the ego, the opposite is true if the shadow is integrated properly. If the shadow is not integrated properly and suppressed, there can be negative effects that can affect the individual and those around them. And so while Inui is the villain who is trying to absorb people's power and take over the world, I think he can also definitely represent the shadow self, right? Not only Paprika's shadow self, but also just the general embodiment of everybody's shadow self, because these characters have been avoiding this other side of themselves. And so when Paprika literally integrates the shadow self into herself, that is when she becomes whole. Just like that quote says about, even though the shadow may seem a negative archetype, one that would degrade and destroy the ego, the opposite is true if the shadow is integrated properly. And so I feel like that is what happens when she literally integrates the shadow self into herself. But then some final thoughts. I love that Roman Holiday is referenced in this movie. That's one of my favorite romantic comedies. And it's a romantic comedy, but it does have a sad ending, but I love that movie so much. And so it was cool to see that referenced here. Also, Kon specifically had Kogawa resemble Akira Kurosawa when he is talking about filmmaking techniques. And Akira Kurosawa is a legendary Japanese filmmaker, and I recently talked about him because I covered High and Low just a few weeks ago. But also it's funny because when their boss early on, he's going crazy and he starts talking nonsense, I was so confused because I thought the audience was supposed to be understanding him. And I was just like, what? I am not following this at all. Like, what is going on right now? But then when I realized that he's going crazy and we're not meant to understand him, that's when it started to make sense. But I did think every time we saw this nightmare dream parade, like the music they play and just everything about it, I just thought it was such a cool idea, and the parade aspect is unique to the movie. And I thought it was such a great visual to show the infection that's spreading, right? The infection takes the form of this bizarre parade. And again, the music that plays during the parade scene, just perfect. Also, I really like the opening credits and the song that plays there as well. And then also the radio club is in book and movie, but in the book, the radio club is a real place, although it does have a weird vibe to it, and the two bartenders seem to have something going on there, and it's always the same song playing in that bar. And then we end with the two bartenders So maybe there's more going on with them in the book than it seems. But in the movie, this bar is online. And so Paprika has him meet her at this bar, and that's kind of how they enter the dream world. And she talks about how the internet and dreams are kind of similar. And I loved this with both book and movie, really, because like the dream world, the internet is a place we can visit, and yet we can't literally go there. Like, it's not a tangible place, and yet it is a place we can enter into. And also sometimes, like how dreams, we can be our truer selves, like a different version of ourselves. With the protection of the internet, we can also present ourselves differently than how we do in the real world. And then the internet and dreams aren't a tangible, real thing, and yet they can infiltrate the real world and have very real effects. And sometimes they can be very real adverse effects, like the way we see in both book and movie Paprika. And so it's interesting viewing both book and movie through the lens of the internet. And even though the movie does this more directly than the book had, even when reading the book, it's interesting to compare dreams with the internet. But when it comes to book versus movie, surprise, surprise, the movie wins, obviously. I think, again, the book had a lot of potential, and Satoshi Kon just took such a cool idea and made it into something so much better. And he got rid of everything that kept the book down and focused just on the positives and really highlighted those aspects, and turned it into something pretty incredible. And by the way, the two bartenders at the radio club are voiced by Satoshi Kon and the author of the book. So it is cool that the author of the book was involved in the movie. But yeah, Satoshi Kon really knows how to elevate the source material, because this and the movie Perfect Blue are just miles ahead of the books that they were based on, honestly. And also, with Paprika, to be fair, it's no fault to the author necessarily that a story like this that explores the wild things that can happen in a dream, a visual medium just works better. So a movie is just better suited for a story like this. And so again, that's not the author's fault that he just had this awesome idea that didn't work as well in a book. And so that's another thing that the movie has in its favor, is you just get to see and hear the insane world of the dreams, which then infiltrate the real world. And yeah, the way he did it was just so cool. So yeah, that wraps it up for Paprika. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share your thoughts down below. And I will see you next time. Bye.